Good evening. It is May 11th, day 11 of this 30-day challenge that we are on together. My name is Westerfield Tolbert. This is a Mind of Valor. It's 10:46 p.m. because today was busier than normal, whereas I enjoy and prefer going live in the morning. Today, I am going live in the evening. Nonetheless, we will continue with what we've been discussing over the last couple of days. Previously, we discussed vision and vices, but today I really want to hone in on language. Language is the L in valor, and it is supremely important among all the other 25 contiguous valor principles. And language extends past just the conversations that we have with individuals. Language is really the conversation that we are having with ourselves on a regular basis. We will get back to that. Now, just to give folks who are tuning in for the first time an introduction, again, my name is Westerfield Tolbert. I have challenged myself with going live once a day, at least every day for the minimum of 30 days and thereafter, so I can strengthen my capacity to go online and, as I've said, participate in the public discourse and eventually do live interviews and among other interesting and engaging activities once we build community. It is Mother's Day Eve, so I will go live tomorrow and talk about mothers, but shout out to the mothers as we are approaching their day of recognition. But today, I really want to talk about language. Oftentimes, we only focus on the language that is extended between ourselves and other individuals or things that we read online in the paper. But I really want us to consider the importance of the language and the conversation that we are having with ourselves on a regular basis. That internal conversation, which is so unique to every individual, and it is a reflection of pretty much every conversation that they've had in their life that had some staying power. The conversations that they had with teachers coming up, mentors, parents, anyone that they were in relationship with who was frequently communicating with them and giving them insights and opinions and telling them about themselves and sharing their stories and anecdotes and things like that. And what happens is, just like everything else we've been going over, these conversations go in, these are these inputs, and they rest within the person. Now, how a person handles that, all this knowledge that they've, all these opinions, all these thoughts that come from the external environment, what do they do with that? For most of us, they live in our heads. We may not remember every single facet of every conversation, but the ones that really hit and they resonated with us, they live in our heads. They bounce around and they appear in our dreams. They appear in the way we articulate different experiences. They come across in how we relate to the world and how we relate to other people, what we think our potential is based on conversations that we've had in the past and the conversation that we've chose to rest in our minds and to become part of our identity and part of our personality and our character. I am on this journey because I often, among other things, look to change that conversation within my own mind and to strengthen that positive talk and not get hung up on the little minute insecurities or those subtle, nuanced jabs that get thrown at us that we can't quite understand or don't know how to interpret. So we just run that loop on replay, trying to understand something that doesn't need to be understood at all, right? And that conversation will affect our confidence, the things that we go after, the things that we pursue, from jobs to relationships to schools to certifications, accreditations across the board. There's an infinite amount of um, crossover with how we interact with the world. Right now, I'm thinking about a conversation I had many months ago with a person whom expressed some discontent. But when I tried to follow up in that moment, like, where is this coming from? Like, what's the foundation for this? What's the catalyst for all this? They had no response. They were just like, I don't know. It didn't even get to that far. They were just like, this is where I'm at. And at first, it really confused me. So for like days, I would say even weeks after that conversation, I was just really going through the motions, trying to understand how this person could have come to this understanding, what triggered them, what made them feel this way, trying to understand. Well, let me say this. I try to live by the motto, if I can't change the people around me, then I have to look to see if it's something that I'm projecting that I need to repair or restore, or if it's possibly something that I'm not fully knowledgeable about myself that I'm projecting into the world. But in this situation, that wasn't the case. This person had their own situation, their own things that they were going through, and it just happened to come to a head with me on that particular day. And I just received that energy. But for me, when I took it in, I'm just bouncing it around for days. Like, why is this the case? What have I done? And then when I stopped myself, I was like, oh, hold up. I'm not going to vest this person's projection based on what they're going through and make it part of make it about me, make it a part of my personality, or label it a flaw or something that I'm resting with. So that was just one of those situations that just reminded me to break that loop or that cycle of conversation that's just that repeat, and come back to myself and be like, okay, it's not about me, it's about that person. And I have to just release that. I can't hold that energy. I can't hold that word. I can't hold that language. I look at language like spells, essentially. And the words that we use, the conversations that we have, the things that we put into the universe, these are this is our spirit casting spells with our words. And words carry a high frequency. So I'm very cautious about what I say, how I talk to my children, how I talk to my employees, how I talk to my co-workers, other board members, because I'm well aware that the things that we say, or the things that I say, once they enter the public domain or once they enter a conversation, will have an effect on somebody else. And I'm not astute enough in the mechanics of another person's brain to fully understand how they're going to interpret my words. So I just try to be respectful in every conversation. I tried my best to seek understanding. I am always looking for the right question to ask at the right time, so I can really have a deeper understanding, than I can then make an actionable decision or a pivot where it's appropriate. But really, language is one of those things where, because we use it every day, we take it for granted, and we don't necessarily appreciate the weight of our language. You look at something like the Bible, this text, this language that was used has existed for over 2,000 years, right? Um, Music that circulates has staying power for decades. This is all language, but also the conversations that happen in our homes with our parents in particular, and those people that early on we look to as trusting voices in our ecosystems, right? So if we're having a trusted voice tell us something that upsets us or we don't quite understand, and we're sitting with that information and we're having this conversation on repeat, it's just bouncing around, we don't necessarily get to the point of clarification, that clarity that gets to understanding, that gets to a changed action or a changed behavior, or what's the really necessary outcome from that new information. So if you're out there and you have a mentee, a student, a child, really anyone in your life, just be mindful that the language that you use and the words that you send out there will have an effect on somebody else. And as you are walking through life, just know that it is reasonable for you to appreciate the gravity of words that people lay on you. And our jobs are one of our jobs is to know where to take that information, know how to compartmentalize it, where in our memory we will place it, and also how to frame those conversations so that we take that information and are truly using it towards our growth, and not using it, or taking that information and not really having a plan for it or understanding where to place it. Therefore, it just becomes that loop that's going on in our head, that voice, that unknown. Just to loop back to our overarching theme of asking better questions. When you're in those type of situations and it's appropriate and you have the space and the privilege to ask particular questions when you are receiving certain information, it will help you. It helps me on a daily basis to know how to place certain information. So I'm going to ask the tough questions up front when I get information, so that I am aware of how to handle the conversation in my own mind, how to frame that information, how to guard my internal conversation against language that's harmful. I don't use things, I won't say things to myself like, damn, I'm dumb for that, or I'm clumsy. I don't use those terminologies. If I hear my son's using that, I'm like, I'm gonna stop you right now. We don't use that type of language. You're not going to take an incident like, oh, I spilled a cup of juice and turn it into, oh, I'm clumsy. I'm a clumsy person, something that defines your identity. It's unacceptable in my household with my kids, even with my siblings. I don't let that rock. I'm just like, hey, don't let that become something that you're attaching to your personality, because that's not the case. It's a particular event, an incident. That's something that happened as far as external goes. Now, if it's something that's a repetitive thing that's going on and over, and that's a different conversation. That's the conversation that starts like, well, obviously the conversation that you're having in your head is so loud that it is interfering with your lived experience. You have put yourself under a spell. You've convinced yourself that you are this thing, or that you are not this thing. And because of that, you walk through life and your relationships and opportunities with a proclivity to think certain things and to hold certain assumptions about yourself. And language is one of those things where it extends past just cursing or big words. It's the really simple things that we tell ourselves every day that affect how we move through life. For example, I look at every obstacle as an opportunity. Like, I literally put that on my dry erase board. I take the dry erase marker, write it on the mirrors in my bathrooms. And obstacles equal opportunities, you know, and things that just remind me that not getting stuck in a negative conversation loop is the best thing. Like, don't end up there. Don't turn a spell into black magic against yourself. And It's difficult because people can't see the conversation that we're having in our heads, and we hardly can even really interpret the conversations that we're having in our own heads sometimes, because it's difficult, and unless you're intentionally making an effort to thwart that, things will just happen. It'll just be happenstance again and again and again. Some tools that I use to get ideas out of my head is journaling. I journal frequently. I journal in the morning. I journal in the afternoon. I journal in the evening. I have multiple journals. I have a small little red notebook that I can carry in my pocket. I got this one by the bedstand. I have digital journals that I keep on my iPads or my phone, things that are synced up. And all it's just really to pull ideas and things out of my head, get them on paper. I find that when I write things out, when I take the time to write out ideas or conclusions that I've come to, then I can better find the incongruency, the fallacies in my own thinking, and my own reasoning. And then I can better decipher what that narrative that I'm hearing in my head, where it should be placed, right? I can better decipher what is my own voice and what is the voice of people out, external people who I've listened to or have received information from, that I just have brought in and assumed that it's part of myself or my identity, or I've ascribed it to myself. But putting them down on paper, list forms, journaling, short stories, I write music, I write poetry, whatever is the mechanism to get it out, and that it will allow me to go back and reflect on it. I have trusting people in my sphere of influence who I can go to and be like, hey, this thing's just kind of been on my mind. What are your thoughts on this? Or how would you approach the situation? Or just generally speaking, what is your experience with these type of things? Um, you have those type of trusting people in community. It makes it easier to decipher some of that language, some of that gumbo of information that's floating around. But you have to trust yourself in those situations as much as you trust somebody else. You have to uh, trust yourself that when you receive that information from a trusted source or somebody in community with you, that when I say trust yourself, I mean that you'll receive that information and do something with it. You have to trust the other person to know that they're going to give you authentic feedback and not uh, layer on their own biases and traumas and preconceived notions about life and so on and so forth. And at the end of the day, you just want to be ultra aware of the conversation that you're having, ultra aware of the language that you're using to describe yourself and your experience. If you talk in colorful language and you describe the world as vibrant and full of opportunity, then you'll see the world in color. If the language that you use to describe life and your experiences is dark and grim, that's how you'll experience life. That becomes, again, that filter that you will interpret your experiences through. So while you're asking questions of the world on a consistent basis, be asking yourself the same type of questions regarding, is this really the thoughts that I have? Like, when did I acquire this thought? Like, when did I come up with this belief? Like, who did I get this belief from? Like, where did this even come from? You have to be willing to ask yourself those tough questions. And then when you come up against something that you're like, you know what? I'm trying to change this conversation internally, but I recognize that my behaviors, my habits, my mannerisms, my vices, something in my external, internal experience is giving validity to that narrative in my head. Then it's like, okay, that's something that needs to change. And then it's our response, especially if it's something that is not positive or is affecting your well-being, your self-esteem, and you're juxtaposing how you feel about yourself to the habits or the vices that you're contributing to that feeling. It's like, okay, I need to change something. And that awareness, that asking better questions, that paying more attention to the language in your head gives you a better roadmap, the things that you want to change to be more positive, to be more beneficial, to get more out of life and your experiences. Our language is and will always be um, supremely important. Our body language, our verbal, our written, and all the different ways that we express ourselves are supremely important. Our posture, these are all just different types of ways that we communicate who we are, where we come from, what we stand for, what we will allow, what we value, what we experience, what we expect to get from interactions and experiences. And that positive talk, that optimistic talk, it goes a long way. It's like if you live in that frequency on that high level, it's as if you're saying a prayer constantly all day. Like I don't separate positive high level positive thoughts or meditations from prayer. So to me they run hand in hand. They are just as strong and have just as much potency for you to throw that into the universe and say, this is what I'm aspiring for and towards, and this is who I am. This is the identity I've convinced myself of in my mind. This is the language I'm using to articulate that identity, and this is true. So help me God. Right? So our language is prayer on that level and with that example. So if you were to be praying, why then would you pray for wickedness, or why then would you pray for your downfall, or pray to amplify your insecurities, or um, pray to prey on the beefs that you have? Hell, when language is that, it's that vast, like going back to the example of the individual who I was dealing with, that situation that I had to just release and understand that it was something that they were going through. Had I just become too vested in that conversation that I was having internally about this person and about myself and what a, what about me, then it would be like I'm telling the universe, or I'm telling God, or pray through my prayer, that I need more of this. Whatever it, I want more of this. Whatever it is, I'm telling my spiritual self, essentially, that I want to amplify this feeling. I want to bring more of this into my livelihood because I'm thinking about it so much, and it's got to break. You got to sever that. Just one more thought on this before I conclude for the evening. I was reminded, well, it's an election year, right? And I'm thinking about language in terms of like social media and just how algorithms work, and the way that people utilize social media almost the wrong way. So, for example, when Donald Trump was running for president, people are constantly Trump this, Trump's bad, Trump's wicked, hate Trump, Trump's racist, Trump's sexist, all this stuff, not really fully understanding that the way the algorithm is set up, it's going to amplify what's constantly being repeated. So as you constantly, even though they're negative statements about him or his character, the algorithm pulls them to the top of the feed. You're constantly bringing that energy back to the top of the feed. That's kind of how language works in our minds. If it's something that we don't want, but we're constantly thinking about it and playing that conversation, we're just bringing it back up to the top of our feed, top of our feed, top of our feed, to the point that when we're walking through life, and we're walking through our relationships, this filter, this cloud, this veil is right there. It's just obstructing our ability to engage the world authentically and at a high level without distraction. And we really want to get to the point where we can engage at a high level without distraction so that we are aware of the experiences that we're going through so that we can ask better questions and have clarity with every situation that we're in so we can get the most out of it and sow the most into these experiences that we will have and that we are having. So on this day 11, thank you for joining me on this A Mind Valor by Westerfield Tolbert. I kind of slowed that down just a little bit because most of my peers call me Wes when they meet me. So, but when the first time you meet me, I want you to call me Westerfield. You gotta get close enough to call me Wes. But just be mindful of your language. Be mindful of that internal conversation. Be mindful of the way you talk to your children. Be mindful of the way you talk to your students. All of this will have a dramatic effect and it will echo and echo and echo. So make sure that echo is a positive one. Thank you for joining me on day 11, and I look forward to seeing you on day 12.